All right, welcome to Marketing from the Source. I'm Chris Sell, and I'll be your host for this episode. On this show, we invite thought leaders and senior industry experts for unfiltered conversations that focus on how the data cloud is dramatically changing sales and marketing. This is also straight from the source, so we encourage hot takes from our guests. We like controversy because these are tough topics, and we got to find a path together. So today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Naveen Dittakavi. Naveen is an airfare search savant whose proprietary software helps everyday people realize their goals of traveling internationally sooner rather than later. Naveen has garnered coverage in print and broadcast outlets around the world, including Business Insider, Growth Lab, The Ringer, Entrepreneur on Fire, and Cheddar. An entrepreneur of over 25 years, he's been designing software programs since 1996 and holds a patent in data retrieval systems. From early on, he's been fascinating with creating software products that make people's lives easier, and Next Vacay is the perfect manifestation of that. Naveen, I'm very excited to have you today.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. Good to be here.
And so, Naveen, I'd love to dive straight into Next Vacay and really understand the origin story or the genesis. How did you end up creating Next Vacay, and can you tell us that story to start out?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it started from a place of wanting to travel as much as we possibly could before we started a family. And so I got married in 2014. And with that in mind, we kind of knew that, family would be coming a few years later. And so how were we going to go and do as much as we could before, changing our priorities and changing our focus and kind of staying more closer to home for a while? Well, it started off with on Christmas morning of 2013, a friend of mine, I was up at 6 o'clock and just scrolling on social media, and a friend of mine had posted a note saying that a blog had said that they uncovered an error on Etihad Airlines, and that error was causing flights to be wildly discounted. So I knew that we were going to try to go to India to visit my wife's grandmother, and I said, well, let me just plug it in. I know Etihad flies there, connects in Abu Dhabi, and plug it in, and lo and behold, the per person cost to fly to India round trip was $300. And I was like, whoa. I plugged in our dates and it was still $300. I was like, okay, so this is not a fluke. This is not a particular day of the week kind of deal. It was 3-4 months in advance. It was working. And my wife woke up and I was like, hey, I'm seeing this flight deal going on for $300 round trip to India. We know that we needed to go in March. Why don't we book it and see what happens? And she didn't believe that this was gonna work. And I was like, I'm on the checkout page on the airline's website. Let's see what happens. Put in the credit card, buy it. Actually, the order confirmed or ticket confirmed page. And I was like, well, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be honored. Let's wait for the e-tickets.
You're going to show up at the gate and they're like, excuse me, sir, did you spend $300 on this ticket? We are not allowing you in.
Yeah. I just kind of, maybe it was just a bug, there's a couple of zeros missing. And I was like, let's just see what happens. I knew that tickets are, it's one thing to place an order, it's another thing for a ticket to get issued. Yeah. And 5-10 minutes later in my Gmail, 2 tickets come right in on e-ticketing from the airline saying tickets are issued. I go in there, put in the confirmation code, it sees it, and I can select seats and everything. And I'm like, oh my God, we're booked tickets to India for $300. And we ended up calling a bunch of friends and family. It was Christmas morning, right? And they're like, Merry Christmas, why are you calling us this hour? And I was like, well, because you need to go online and buy your tickets to India, it was all over the world that you could go. You could go to Australia, Hong Kong for $300 round trip around that price. And so it kind of set it off. People thanked us, our friends and family thanked us for letting them know about that crazy deal that was going on. And I was like, you know what? Let's see if this is more than just this one time. And I ended up finding more and more deals like that after becoming aware of this. And then I began telling friends and family via WhatsApp, about the stuff that I was seeing, and people were taking me up on it. And I was like, I think there's something here. I think that I can take this way wider than just my friends and family. And I put together this business and a platform that allows for us to let people know what we're coming across. And it's all by hand, by humans, and now at a different scale because we serve all over the United States, as well as many other countries around the world.
It's interesting because it's a very shareable moment too. When you find one of those deals, you want to spread it. So I have one is I was flying from San Francisco to London. I was looking up flights. I was expecting it to be $2,000 or something like that when I first looked. I still remember when I looked on for some reason I looked on Norwegian Air because they had just launched the airline and they were doing tickets for $450. And I literally told all of my friends and family, like, this was one of the best moments of my year to tell them about that I got a flight for $450 from San Francisco to London. Well, because you're enabling travel for something at a very low cost, which is a discovery and it's a self-realization thing. So it's very exciting.
And our goal was to help more people, realize that so much more of the world is accessible to them. I think a lot of people go about life thinking that international travel or even domestic travel is meant for people with significant means. When you start knocking down the price of travel to like domestic round trip flights to New York, like $400 flights, what I pay to go to New York sometimes. And like when you start knocking that down and you start saying it's, it costs the same to go to New York as it costs to go to Europe or Asia, it really opens the door to a lot of people who never had a passport in their lives heading off to the post office to get a passport.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. It pulls it forward from, hey, I'm going to do a Viking cruise when I'm 65, 70. And actually, you know what? I'm going to actually go to Germany next year, which is pretty cool. In terms of, it seems to me like that moment you had on Christmas morning, it's the shareability moment of how do you get these deals out to folks and let them know about them in a timely manner is pretty crucial to the business. Like ultimately, you're a data business in that you're identifying deals, but then you're a communications business because the identification is only as value as how many people actually discover this and change their behavior based on that. So I find that fascinating because I know you come from a software engineering background, so the data side and analyzing deals, that's a lot of your background has been, but then now you're layering on the communication piece, going from calling your family to WhatsApp to I need a marketing technology stack to actually coordinate these communications. And so as a growing business, how have you started to piece that together since it's so crucial to what Next Vacay does?
Well, there's two sides of the equation. One is in the broadcast side, and one is in the creating awareness to let people know that such opportunities exist. On the broadcast side, we tried various off-the-shelf tools. I actually got started by copy and pasting into MailChimp and manually sending out deals that way. And that's how we got off the ground. But over time, especially as you needed to build a team and infrastructure behind it, I developed in my V1s, sending transactional emails via batch and then navigating that space and trying to figure out how do you make sure that, all of your email settings are done correctly so that, when you're dumping tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of emails into, the major ISPs, that they're not looking at you funny, like this is spam. So going through the steps of working with really quality companies like Postmark and just kind of explaining these are actually transactional messages. It's like a password reset. People are paying us to receive this information in real time, and it's not spam. They have paid to receive our emails.
The ultimate opt-in. They're literally paying you for the communication. You don't see that very often,
That's right. It's folks like us, Motley Fool, or any kind of other information publisher where you're paying, we're only $25, but a lot of people are paying thousands of dollars for these financial publishers. And in our case, how do we deliver in a timely manner these alerts at scale? And in that particular case, we're able to solve that using Postmark for transactional delivery. But with respect to awareness, it's now how do we let people know about the services available to them, whether it is in, whether they're in Austin or whether they're in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, we provide the deals to them. And so we have become essentially a data company that happens to let people know about the flight deals that we're seeing. And we had to do that in a way that it continues to speak authentically to who we are. The reason why people come to us and choose us over, others or other maybe potentially automated solutions that are out there is because the level of curation. They know that we're not an automated company, meaning that like these are not deals that are just kind of like coming through the wire and then we're just passing them forward. They're going through massive manual filters by us, using our background as travelers to be like, well, you know what, 90 minutes is not enough time to connect in Paris. We can't send that out because, just because it's a good deal to get to, say, Kenya for safari, it's just not enough time. We actually say no more often than we say yes. And that is what, I think is a balance between automation and curation. I was always a fan of what Apple has done in kind of keeping things as simple as possible. And that has continued to be how we approach our business as far as the consumer is concerned.
So it sounds like you started from your marketing technology stack. I guess, could you give an overview? It sounds like you started with MailChimp and then Postmark you started using for the transactional emails to actually send the deal alerts. What else have you explored in your marketing stack to date?
Yeah, well, it's been a wild ride. And, a lot of it has been homegrown, mostly because we didn't find a lot of solutions that were off the shelf that did what we wanted to do, that weren't also surrounded with an enormous amount of bloatware or massive enterprise deals. And so as a software developer and essentially I'm the chief software architect for our team, I'm able to explain, what these large, monoliths are doing and just kind of explain like, well, here's how we do it ourselves by following the API documents. And so we developed our own advertising systems, we developed our own analysis systems, and that got us to a certain point. But after a certain point, like homegrown works, but sometimes you need, as you become more sophisticated with your data journey, you start, for the longest time we were not using warehouses. We were happy with our, MySQL transactional databases and running reports there, and and it was all fine. But once we kind of realized, that got us here. That's not going to get us to where we want to be. If we want to go to the next level, we're going to need to really surround ourselves and take ownership of our data completely, and that goes from both the analysis side as well as the activation side. It started off by it being frustrating for me to perform advertising analysis in Excel, just mostly because it was just extremely cumbersome to keep track of the variety of ads that we've been running, and it was just taking too long to help guide the marketing team on where to go next. So we started, I said let's just bring everything in, and rather than trying to use VLOOKUP to look for patterns or areas of success, why don't we just do this properly in a data warehouse and use SQL to help us with templatizing some of our analytical processes. Then we started working with companies like Narrator and on the analysis side and then on the targeting side and activation. That was it was interesting. It's been, there are certain challenges with that. So we started off by using different tools to help us analyze our data from a targeting standpoint, but then that's one thing. How do you take action on it and how do you activate it? And that's when I began to learn more about the activation space. I was like, okay, so one, I had to first understand the word. What does activate mean? I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, oh, you mean targeting? Okay. And trying to acquire people based on that targeting.
Yeah, fancy term for targeting.
Yeah, all this fancy bloatware terms. There's so much tax, unfortunately. And so I began to learn about it. And then there's some nice folks out there. A lot of companies are offering you can give us a try by, pushing to one destination or this or that. And I tried all of those, the big ones out there. And ultimately, I was just getting frustrated, just kind of seeing that I kind of get what they're trying to solve. But again, we're back to the situation of it's just way too much overhead, not just cost. Actually, costs were in some of these cases are relatively reasonable. But just to get one destination to load, it was taking weeks because we were talking about massive data sets on our end. And I was like, why? This is just a Python script that just needs to run and back off when it hits rate limits. Why is this so difficult? Why are you guys making this so hard?
Yeah.
And it's been like a little frustrating to see, for whatever reason, there are a lot of companies out there that kind of make it difficult for small medium businesses to be able to be efficient with their data activation. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it makes sense. And actually, the kind of the journey you just described, which I see a lot of folks start to go through, is they start to say, hey, I'm doing analysis in Excel, maybe for paid media or my email campaigns, and trying to attribute what purchases happen because of my email campaigns. I'm doing it in Excel. Hey, maybe we should start to centralize this in a data warehouse of some sort so I can run the queries faster. And then start to layer on, I know in your case it was Narrator, could be Looker, Tableau, Power BI, or something simpler like a data studio to do some visualization. But then that next question does become activation, and the space is just kind of a mess. And we're all trying to figure out what activation means and how you can target easily. And I guess I know it's particularly, in our conversations in the past on the reverse ETL side, you have a unique insight because you're an engineer as well. So you're like, your comment just there is, hey, isn't this a scheduled Python script? Like, what's up? And also, I have so much data. Do I really want to move it over to these other systems? Is that the right thing to do? I guess in terms of reverse ETL, like, what alternative solutions have you started to think about? Are you thinking about, are there other challenges you've seen with it? But then also, have you gone with the homegrown solution, writing the Python script and scheduling it until you need the next step? Or how have you solved for it?
Yeah, so, well, the first thing we wanted to do was just to be like, hey, this is all nice. And this all came, these ideas came from surrounding myself with, what's happening in the marketing data technology area these days, and kind of being smart about and being a little bit more conservative in the post-COVID climate of where our ad dollars go. And so I was like, okay, let's just get a proof of concept off the ground. I don't want to name names, but everybody knows about the players in the space, such as High Touch and Census and all these other guys, and that's all fine. And they offer some free level to kind of get off the ground. And I really was hoping that especially since they were kind of making it seem to be a straightforward point and click method, that it would be pretty straightforward. Like, here is our cleaned, hashed data. Please load that into this destination. Because actually the reverse is very easy. We use a company called Hevo Data for a lot of our ETL work, and it's actually pretty straightforward. It was like, there's the source, we like Redshift, here's the destination, and they handle all of the mapping, and and then sometimes you got to get in there and help clean, but very straightforward. I was like, this is very nice. Let's may I have this in reverse, please? And no, the answer is no. And I was like, okay, what can we do here? Like, what's happening? Why is it not working? When you're talking about 100 million rows or whatever the case is, I was like, okay, here you go. Here's I was willing. I literally spent a week plus of my time on this. I was like, okay, if you're having trouble sucking this in from Redshift, how about Athena and talking about flat files? I would prep the files for them. It's like, how about pure CSV? Can you just no? None of these solutions were effective at scale, and I was just so shocked to see how much of a challenge these major companies were having with what we thought was a pretty simple, straightforward use case. Ultimately,
sorry to interrupt, but I was just on the use case side. When you were trying to do that type of scale, when we're talking tens of millions here or 100 million, was this to go to paid media channels like Facebook ads, Google ads for
Correct.
Trying to send them conversion data, or what were you what was the, or was it targeting data for custom audiences?
Yeah, it's targeting data, the PII hashes of the people who we would like to reach, right? And oftentimes you have various records for a single person. Yep. So it give you 100 million rows,
sure.
But it probably only is 10 million individuals that you're trying to reach. But and so it's important for us to get that data loaded, because in this post-COVID climate, we wanted to make sure that we were reaching people who we had scored to be the right fit for us. And so we cannot go live with our marketing campaigns if we are not reaching the people who we wish to reach, like, or we can only use the other data sources that are available in the various paid media platforms.
Yeah.
So, it was very frustrating. Ultimately, there was one solution that worked, but it took like 12 days to load 100 million records. And
Yeah.
that was crazy. That was crazy because I did a back of the napkin math on the API limits. And I was like, what in the world? Like, why? Like, I was like, this is all free, right? I was like, if you expect me to pay for this, you gotta be kidding. Like, it was just really unfortunate because I had high hopes because my experience up until I tried to activate was relatively straightforward and helpful. Like the guys over at Hevo Data, they have live like chat with engineers. They've got there's like really clean interfaces to be able to like transform and prep your data, and there's like lots of documentation, and all of the pre-work is done on their servers, not on my servers. And it's very clear like how they're loading their data in. They're just sending in S3 files and using simple load statements, native Redshift, to bring it into Redshift. And then and these reverse providers are doing all kinds of crazy things. They're creating massive temp tables. Like if I have a source table of 100 million rows, like that's a pretty big table in and of itself. Now you're going to clone it. I was like, it's already prepped. Just take it and put it into the platform. Don't do any more manipulation. But yeah, no, like they would create, materialized views and temp tables and like basically eat up my entire capacities, both on the CPU side as well as the storage side, bring us to a crawl, and this is not fun. And so anyway, we suffered through it and eventually did a POC. It took 12 days to get it loaded, and we're like, okay, cool, like this does work. Like we were able to see benefit from providing bring your own targeting. And but then
well, that's good. The value side was real, though. It was like it sounds like you went a Herculean quest, but the value on the other side was real to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you ask me now, it's like, how are you going to do that again? Well, definitely not using those tools that we tried before. None of which was Flywheel, but it's either going to be like experimenting, with a homegrown or whatever the case is. We don't know. It was quite a heavy lift to get a POC out the door. Very happy to see that the POC was successful. And now the question is, well, how are we going to do that again on smaller data sets, most likely?
Well, okay, so here's a fun follow-up. I feel like this is an aggressive question because of what you just experienced with bring your own targeting in a single channel. But one, it's how do you rinse and repeat? But then the other question I had for you is, I'm sure there's other channels. Like if you have folks that are signing up for the first month on Next Vacay and you're getting them to convert to paid members, there's probably a marketing program around that may include email, SMS, push notification, etc., plus paid media. And so as you think about the problem multiplying to additional channels, how are you thinking about that? I know you're trying to automate paid media. When you're thinking about the other channels that you'll go out to these groups, and how are you starting to think about that strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we do not presently have a method. I know that this is what Flywheel has or is in the process of releasing, but we don't have a method of orchestrating synchronization of the user journey across all those channels. And, the way that we would approach that if we were to do it homegrown is that we would have to wire those things together. However, we do have, things that we've invested in building, such as these continuously materialized views that allow for us to kind of understand where our users are at a glance across their journey with us. However, it's one thing to have that as kind of visualization. It's another thing to then push state out to the different vehicles that you're using to influence that journey to drive the best user experience as well as the best marketing efficiency experience.
It's a really interesting way to describe it, is you're establishing the state in the user journey in the warehouse and through your analysis, but now you got to get that state to all these other tools for the cross-channel synchronization.
That's right.
Which is basically
it's not an easy not an easy thing, and we're aware that there are folks out there who can help us. So we're looking forward to continuing those conversations.
Yeah, full disclosure to all listeners, I'm also one of the co-founders over at Flywheel in the data activation space. So I got to ask the question just because it's a fun one, and it's so I can use the hashtag generative AI on this episode on the post, Naveen, So I have two questions on the generative AI front. Like, how do you see it? I think everybody's talking about, hey, how does this disrupt the very world we live in? They're in that moment right now. I want to ask the opposite side of that, which is, how do you think generative AI is going to benefit companies like Next Vacay?
Yeah, well, I think that there's certain aspects to, generative AIs and understanding how to use them from a prompt perspective to assist with moving things along a little bit faster and maybe helping along with the ideation side of things. We certainly have experimented with, very common marketing tasks, whether it's copywriting or helping us like think outside the box. I think that like that's where for people who know what they're doing, it's nice to almost have a buddy to bounce ideas off of or to spitball with. And I think that like as long as you can train your buddy in the same way that you're thinking about the problem, and which is what we've seen. So if you give it enough context and you give it enough training with respect to like how you would like the response of the GPT to be, then it can be helpful. It can help you kind of think about things differently. My only prior experience with things like that have been actually to be listening to folks on various podcasts kind of talking about how they're approaching different problems, but and then like kind of taking that back, sitting on it, and then ideating on how we could approach it in a similar way. So like GPT could be helpful to be able to ideate strategy and tactics. However, I think that there are downsides to it. You always have to continuously test but verify. And you also have to be very careful about what you're willing to give it. We are not presently willing to give it proprietary data, but if you want to have a conversation with me more broadly, like, and what I mean by you being ChatGPT, I'm happy to do that, to kind of like explore kind of like a college classroom environment, but I'm not gonna show you my internals.
Are you starting to think about using it as that first draft? Almost like it's kind of like it's good for ideation, but first draft for copywriting for a landing page or emails to just start a draft for you to then refine? Or are you mostly,
Yeah, we like to use it in much shorter sprints than that. When you try to give it a lot to output, it kind of is like a student who's running out of time and is starting to like sometimes it's writing filler material in order to like hit, your essay better be 500 words or see me after class. Like, I'd rather let's just focus on it one step at a time, one question at a time, one sentence at a time. And if it is successful, then we'll keep adding to it. It becomes additive. We don't trust it at this time to write large drafts. But if you want to show me a few different headlines and different headline formulas, I'm happy to split test it. But we're still like reading every word and making sure that it's accurate, whether it's from a brand safety perspective or just from like, are you describing our business correctly?
I feel like that's where everybody's getting a little bit ahead of it. I think it's fantastic, like you're saying. I'm seeing folks leverage it for drafts for copywriting, and then they got to refine it. But brand protection is real, so there's going to be, and it's really hard to get right because it's one of those things where you got to be 100% right or 99.9999, and the risk has to be so low for the brand for them to say it's worth the automation, and that's going to be an interesting barrier for it to cross on generating creative. Well, Naveen, I know we're getting close to time here. I did want to say we really appreciate having you on Marketing from the Source and the hot takes on the data activation space as well. I do want to say I feel like the data activation space is coming along, so hopefully the next time you're trying to get data to a destination, the CDP and activation space can make it a bit easier, so you can think about the cross-channel marketing. But Naveen, really appreciate you joining, and very inspiring to see what you're doing with Next Vacay, and I know I'm going to be finding my next Norwegian Air 450 deal out to London on your site. So thank you.
Thank you for having me on again. Thank you, Chris.